This is PTV World. I am Syed Shabahat Ali, and you're watching Fault Lines. COP27 has taken place at Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. A conference, this time taking place in Africa. And many issues have been highlighted in this conference. The global community is now increasingly more interested because the evidence of devastation being caused by the climate issues has become very obvious. And let me tell you that this time the global community is making commitments that have not been made in the past. Be it flash floods in Pakistan that drowned 1/3 of the country, heat wave in Europe that was ever highest in the recorded history of human being, or the drying water reservoirs of North America or Central Asia, famine and droughts in many parts of Africa are reminding us of the fact that humanity has run out of time and we have not been able to do enough for reasons, as said by Al Gore in the beginning of this conference. And I quote, 162 million ton pollution is spewed in the sky every day. Each molecule stays for 100 years. So how did this conference go? What was discussed? What are the promises made for the future? All of this in the first segment of this program. Our team has prepared a package. What's the package? Before I bring my first guest to the program.
The UN's Climate Change Summit opened in Egypt for 2 weeks talks where nations are figuring out how to avert the worst of climate change, while leaders and diplomats frame the fight against global warming as a battle for human survival during opening speeches at COP27 Climate Summit in Egypt, with the head of the United Nations declaring a lack of progress so far had the world speeding down a highway to hell. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged nations to accelerate transition from fossil fuels and speed funding to poorer countries struggling under climate impacts that have already occurred, while warning that humanity has a choice: cooperate or perish. Speaking at the COP27 climate conference alongside United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif stated that Pakistan would need debt relief and would seek compensation for climate damage as it recovers from catastrophic floods that cost the country some $30 billion. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif sensitized the international community on the plight of flood-hit Pakistan, highlighting that Pakistan needs additional funding, no debts, to rebuild a resilient and adaptive infrastructure as the financing gap is widening by the day. Despite decades of climate talks, countries have failed to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions, and their pledges to do so in future are insufficient to keep the climate from warming to a level scientists say will be catastrophic. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing, global temperatures keep rising, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible, so it's high time to implement climate pledges.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined by two experts on the issues of climate, and both the guests are based in Sharm el-Sheikh at the moment. On the video link, I am joined by Namira Hamid, and Namira is Engagement Advisor for Climate Outreach, a think tank based in the United Kingdom. Namira, I welcome you to my show.
Thank you so much.
And over the phone, I am joined from Sharm el-Sheikh by Mr. Janta Bhasu. He is Senior Climate Journalist, joining me over the phone. Mr. Bhasu, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sawahat, for inviting me to your program in the Fault Lines. It's really a privilege to be part of your program.
Namira, starting from you, we last spoke almost a year ago, and now you're covering COP27. There are certainly many things that have happened in between. How do you see the progress that have taken place between the last COP and this COP?
So just as a primer, your question is very important, but as a background, United Nations climate summits are held every year. And this is where the governments agree steps to limit global temperature rises. United Nations climate summits are attended by 200 plus global world leaders. So why is it important for all these global leaders to attend them? As we know, global temperatures have been rising from till 1.1 degrees centigrades and are increasing towards 1.5 degrees centigrades, according to the UN climate scientists. But we also know if temperatures rise over 1.5 degrees centigrades, our populations could be exposed to more life-threatening climate disasters. And as we know, Pakistan faced life-threatening floods this year, along with many other countries facing droughts and floods and heat waves. So it becomes even more important to address climate change this year, which is why one of the most important conferences held in Paris in 2015, attended and signed by 194 countries, the Paris Agreement pledged to pursue efforts to limit global temperature rises to 1.5. So since 2015 till now, there has been incremental efforts being put in every year to do more for climate action. And as you said already, COP27 is the 27th annual UN meeting on climate. It's taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh right now, where I currently sit.
Mr. Basu, you are covering the environment issues at large for last 20 years. And I know that you are covering the COPs for last 14 years at least. So how have been your journey through all these conferences? Do you believe there is an increased seriousness now when the devastation of climate have become very evident?
Yes, I have covered climate change for more than 2 decades, and I have been covering especially those COPs, the climate conferences since Copenhagen in 2009. So that's also around 14 years. I won't say that the attitude of the countries have not changed at all over the years. It's a fact that attitude must have changed. The fact that extreme weather events have been happening all around, and of late, it's also been impacting the developed countries. That might have added to the change of attitude. But overall, I think still we are chasing a bit of shadow. We are not doing enough, or whatever we are doing, we are not doing fast enough. So the first we understand this and we recognize this particular impact of climate change is going to affect all the countries. It may be too late to chase a shadow. So absolutely, I agree with that. That we might have done something over the years, but we need to do much more.
Coming back to you, Namira, so how about the loss and damages that have been made so far? What targets have been set forth by COP27 and how satisfied you are with these targets?
So one of the most important targets that everyone talks about here in Sharm el-Sheikh and outside of these conference rooms is how do we manage to put in the financing to limit global temperature rises. So financing has been a major topic this year, especially. So UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently said that delivering on loss and damage at COP27 will be an important litmus test for rebuilding trust between developed and developing countries. And what is loss and damage? Pakistan is a key example. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif shared at COP27 this week that Pakistan has suffered more than $30 billion in loss and damage due to the recent catastrophic floods. And loss and damage is happening all over the world as we write this. There are deadly floods in Nigeria, droughts in Somalia, the worst floods for a century in Bangladesh and parts of India. So all of these climate-related disasters are wreaking havoc, not just to lives, but also livelihoods for the communities in those areas. It's interesting to mention that the Pakistan Pavilion here in the COP27 conference, it has a message at the top saying what goes on in Pakistan will not stay in Pakistan. And it's very true. We see that Pakistan has been instrumental in pushing for the loss and damage to be placed on the official agenda for COP27. So we see a very strong delegation from Pakistan at the COP conference this year, which is incredible.
Namira, you are there in Sharm el-Sheikh, and you must have observed that Pakistan's agenda was sitting right at the heart of this conference. Pakistan has faced a damage of $30 billion. This was discussed openly in the agenda. And also Pakistan's case was discussed at length by the participants. But despite all of this seriousness that we have observed so far, including the visit of Secretary General of United Nations, actually very little have trickled down to Pakistan, despite the fact that Pakistan is currently going through one of the most serious economic crises. Very little of this donation has trickled down to us. What do you believe can be the reason behind this?
we have been seeing speeches by heads of states mentioning this lack of sort of public support in their countries on financing from the global north to the global south. They question, these leaders question how they can pledge such big amounts of financing. But we find in our recent research that this is not necessarily the case. For example, our data across Europe shows that 58% of young people support the idea of compensation for countries that are most affected by climate change. We see that across UK, public is increasingly concerned about climate justice, and policymakers and decision makers are just not keeping up with this rising trend. Even amidst a cost of living crisis in the UK, where my organization is based, climate concern is not taking a back seat. Just this week, our recent research with our partners shows that people in the UK remain deeply concerned about climate change. So the first concern is cost of living, but the second highest concern is actually climate change. So what we get from this research is that if leaders were listening to the public and if leaders were engaging the public, the pledges coming out of these countries would be more ambitious. So that's what we need. We need more public engagement in climate action.
Mr. Basu, this conference is taking place in Africa. And as I said in the introduction, Africa is facing one of the most serious crises. It's running dry. It's seeing famines and droughts worst of its known and recorded history. Do you see some increased or revived seriousness by the African nations this time?
Yes, I think Africa's challenge is a bit of different. Africa, along with South Asia, are two most areas in the world having been impacted by climate change to a large extent. And if you look at Africa alongside with the impact of climate change, the poverty, the high level of poverty, and the health issues all being contributing together. Africa is really a very vulnerable point. And I think I really think that the African leaders have been recognizing it more than the leaders. The people are recognizing it. If you look at the kind of environmental movement, environmental activism happening across African continent, you will definitely agree with me that there has been a lot of impact in the recent time. This particular COP, which is right now being happening in Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt, is considered an African COP. It's considered a developing country COP. So many are pinning their hope that this COP will able to turn the tide to a large extent. If not large extent, at least to a extent to which we are looking at. But the point is, at the same time, it's a bit of a concern that many developed countries, especially the kind of European countries, they are contributing certain amount of money in Africa for some projects which may give Africa dividends in kind of in near future, but will be a problem in the longer future. So African people and African leadership must see these whole things at the larger perspective and take decision according what they need.
Namira, I'm bringing the same question to you. You're also there. You're also covering the environment issues for quite long. You're observing all of these developments quite minutely. So do you see a revived commitment by the African nations?
Absolutely. So Egypt's vision for successful negotiated outcomes at COP27 includes ensuring that no country or group is left behind. And they want to do this through building mutual trust and understanding. That's a key message that we see repeatedly throughout these conferences. There's rising concern on action in every corner of the globe. I believe that global countries from the global south have actually been driving this agenda. We see on Twitter, we see it on marches that are taking place on the roads, that it's actually the people from the global south that are raising pressure on world leaders to be doing more, to be pledging more, and to be more ambitious in what needs to happen very, very urgently. We even see that this pressure that coming from the global south is trickling to public and what public thinks in Europe. So our research from European countries show very high levels of support for government leaders to take urgent climate action. And this concern, if put into meaningful actions by the governments, would be the correct course of action.
Mr. Basu, every conference sets forth remarkable financial targets. I mean, fantastic, charming speeches loaded with statistics, data, and quotes that are surprising. Are you satisfied with the financial targets set forth this time?
Definitely, I think finance has always been the issue of concern. I still remember whenever we discuss finance, I still remember the word the former Environment Minister of India, Jairam Ramesh, once said in Cancun when the issue of fast track finance came up. You might remember that in 2009 in Copenhagen, for the first time, the then Secretary General of US, Hillary Clinton, talked about this $100 billion support to developing countries from 2020, and before that a certain amount of money. But that money, though was promised, never actually came. I still remember Jairam saying about this fast track finance, they were neither fast nor on track. So still it's the same case. The money is neither fast nor on track. Uh, I won't say that that money is not coming at all. They are coming, but they're trickling. They're not really coming the way they should have been. And if you look at the realities on ground, you'll find that recently Green Climate Fund could not support 3 projects, despite those being cleared, simply because the UK government could not provide the money they were supposed to, which they committed because of their own domestic problems. So that's, I think, is something we need to take care of. And I am not going to believe that developed countries don't have the money to support climate change. If you look at the COVID and the response, the global response, and the amount being spent is enormous. I'm not I'm not countering that. Yes, COVID needed that response at that point of time, but climate change is a bigger threat. I say that COVID is just a trailer. Climate change may be the actual film. So if the world has to survive, if the humanity has to survive, this finance has to come. Without finance, only talking, and talking around will not make any sense. Now, people are talking about loss and damage, finance discussion being mainstreamed as a major victory for the developing countries. Yes, that's a major point. But what's the point in discussing? The loss and damage finance has to come, the adaptation finance has to come, the other financial support has to come, and that has to be true financial support. There is no point in playing around, double counting the money, and saying that exactly how much has been given. If you look at the Oxfam report, it clearly shows the distance and the gap between the actual promise and the realized promise. So I think this is very important. From early next week, the political deliberation will start. Definitely, the developed countries, despite whatever been happening in Ukraine, Russia, whatever been happening as uh, after the COVID, they should come up with stronger financial support to ensure that the whole process of countering climate change globally uh, is on track. Simply because if you look at the series of international reports that has come up of late, if you look at the IPCC report AR6, the assessment report 6, they are saying very clearly the climate change problem is no longer a problem of next generation. It's all about the problem of this generation. Even it is said that if we do not start to act by 2025, it may be too late, too costly to counter climate change. 2025 means we are looking just ahead. 2025 means it's now 2022, so hardly 2 years down the line. So it means you have to start working tomorrow, next minute. So unless the finance comes, just talking will not make sense. Finance has to be the key issue in Sharm el Sheikh COP, in this particular COP, which is considered as a developing country COP. to make it a success. So it's the onus is on developed countries. They have to come forward despite whatever the kind of challenges they themselves are facing and support it. Now, many of those countries are saying, we are also suffering. We are also suffering from extreme weather events. So, who are going to support us? Well, the historical responsibility has to be considered. These countries are responsible for the world that the world is now finding it right now. So, they have to come up with the support and support the vulnerable, smaller, the underdeveloped and developing country blocks to ensure that millions of people come out of this, whatever the stress they are in. So, yes, finance is key, and the developed countries have to come forward to support that.
Namira, coming back to you, United States has made a very heavy presence in this conference, led by Mr. Al Gore. And there was a remarkable speech that was showing a revived commitment by United States. This reminds me of 2018, when the United States was walking out of Paris Accord or Paris Agreement. So do you believe United States has started showing far more seriousness than what it demonstrated just 4 years ago?
We see this because because global north and industrialized countries are finally facing some of the climate disasters that we sitting in the global south were facing for a lot of decades. You know, it's interesting that when a lot of the talk about financing is being conducted, it's usually about the money that needs to be given to global south as reparations, but that's just a very small part of the entire conversation. Global north, so USA being one of the most important countries, also needs to put ambitious pledges and finances into making their own clean energy transitions. US has been heavily reliant on fossil fuels, especially gas. So these countries right now simultaneously need to be focusing on their own energy transitions towards net zero.
Mr. Bhasu, I have a tricky question for you. Now, climate change is not something that any single power can handle unilaterally. We have countries like United States and China not in good terms with each other. European Union is not also agreed to what many other countries may believe can be the right solutions for it. We have countries like India that are not participating in the mainstream decision making despite being one of the major carbon emitters of the world. Now, this isolation of various significant stakeholders is certainly leading us to a different situation. Would you agree with me on that, sir?
Well, that is always the problem of climate dialogue. If we look at the UNFCCC structure, the structure is a bit different from the run-of-the-mill structure. For example, you have 200 countries who are part of this UNFCCC process, and it's not a voting process. So if some proposal is being mooted forward, if some proposal comes up, it's not that 51-49, that if 51 people voted for and 49 against, the 51 people voting whatever for, they are going to win. It's not an US presidency election. It's not an Indian election. It's not a Pakistan election. It's all about the unanimous choice. So all countries have to kind of agree to a certain point to make that point functional and operative. So it makes the whole process slow. There's no doubt about that. Definitely, we all feel the process should be faster. But at the same time, the process, though it's being a slower process, gives you an unanimous option. So that's one step ahead is always one step ahead. So that's where we are. And all these countries you are talking about, it's not a simple thing. If you go back to a history a bit, when this Kyoto Protocol was signed in early 90s, I'm sure that countries didn't understand the implication of cutting emission. They agreed that by 2012, 5.1% emission would be cut by the developed countries. But what we have seen, when 2012, instead of cutting on the 5.1% emission, they actually increased the emission. And since then, the trend is going on. Just now, we have received the carbon budget report. The carbon budget report is showing that globally, overall, the emission has been increasing. It's about 1%, but it's on again increasing. When we are talking about the need to have deep cut in the emission, when we need to leapfrog our action so the emission gets reduced to a large extent, what we are actually doing on ground, we're increasing it. Yes, I understand the country like India, the country like Pakistan, the country like Bangladesh, they are countries which still require to support their people to a large extent. So it's a fact, it's an accepted position that the emission will increase in those countries. But what about the country like USA? It's still been increasing. I saw the report. USA has increased 1.5% from 2021 to 2022. Why? Why USA couldn't turn around this emission? Yes, they can't do it overnight, but they have to have a plan on board that when they're going to do that. So that's what the whole situation is. Very quickly, these countries, the alignment is not a big issue out here. Whether they align with each other, whether China, look at the fact, China and USA are the two biggest emitters, gross emitters in the world right now. But the things are different. China and USA are not similar thing. India is the third most gross emitter, but again the situation is different. If you look at the India's per capita emission, it is much, much, much less than the other developed countries. So the developed countries, whether they align with each other, I don't care. What I care that they themselves, each and every country, need to cut its emission. And if they have to cut the emission, they have to plan it like that. You just can't cut it centrally. You have to plan how your different regions will cut, how your industries will cut, how your different institutions will cut. Recently, there's a report being prepared by an UN High Power Committee, which talked about the need for industries in the regions to be true to their commitment, to be more ambitious about the emission cut. And they also said a word that no cheating, which clearly means that many of these industries or some of these industries or regions are actually cheating with the figure. So be truthful. It's not really, we talk about negotiation. Can we negotiate our life? Can we negotiate our future? Can we negotiate with the existence of this world? I think we can't. So ideally, I'm not very keen to know whether they're aligned with each other or not. What I'm keen at, these countries be truthful, make deep emission cut, whatever possible under the situation, and try to make the world a better place to live in.
Namira, my last question. So, Pakistan's representation in this conference, how did you find it since you are covering these issues for quite long? Do you believe Pakistan actually made a good case? Are you satisfied with the way our case was represented and pleaded at Sharm el-Sheikh?
Our Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has been very active. It's a change from last year because this year we actually have the Prime Minister attending the COP conference in Sharm el-Sheikh. Shehbaz Sharif held a press conference along with the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, which pulled in very large crowds. The Prime Minister made a very strong case that Pakistan deserves massive support directly from the international community. This is because Pakistan wants to see loss and damage financing facility to be considered a reality, and for that reality to be recognized through the financing mechanisms. So we all hope that this conference is able to realize this, not just for Pakistan, but for all the developing countries facing climate change disasters. Along with the Prime Minister, our Minister for Climate Change, Sherry Rahman, has been making very impressive strides in the global climate space. She is rightfully credited for building a very great, strong momentum on loss and damage. She was able to put this agenda on the formal agenda of COP27 this year. And she has also been instrumental in bringing Pakistan's case powerfully to the fore. She speaks eloquently about the role of women and the role of youth in the fight against climate change. So what I take away from this is what will happen when this leadership gets home after COP27. So we hope that this very strong leadership from Pakistan engages the public as well as the youth to be put at the heart of Pakistan's climate action, but also to be to play a very big role in the global strides for urgent climate action.
Thank you very much, Namira Hamid, for being my guest. Thank you very much, Mr. Bhasu, for being guest in our program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join you back with second segment of program. Stay with us. Welcome back. Ladies and gentlemen, another very important development that has recently taken place just this week was 2 years of accomplishment of military success of Azerbaijan over Armenia in the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. Not only Azerbaijan has celebrated 2 years of its military success, but also its allied countries have congratulated Azerbaijan on the success. Now, this reminds us of the conflict that we had in hand and the efforts that have been made in this region. To discuss this and a bit more, I am joined by Mohammad Taimur, who is an independent research analyst and decorates my program frequently. Taimur, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Taimur, first things first. So, Nagorno-Karabakh issue sits at the heart of this conflict. And it would be great if we can just have a recap of this issue for the sake of consumptions of viewers of the program.
Well, before I delve into some of the details of the conflict that erupted 2 years ago, I would like to discuss briefly the history of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict itself. Well, the conflict actually erupted in the early 90s after 1991, when both the ex-Soviet states of Armenia and Azerbaijan gained independence after the Soviet disintegration in 1991. So as you must be aware, that there exists a small territorial enclave between Azerbaijan and the mainland Armenia, known as the Nagorno-Karabakh enclave, on which Armenia's or the pro-Armenian militias, they made a claim that this territory belongs to Armenia. So Armenia actually established its own claim over the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, although majority of the population of that enclave was Azerbaijani, or majority of them were Muslims, ethnic Muslims. But right after the Armenian militias made their claim on the Nagorno-Karabakh enclave, there was a huge massacre of ethnic Azerbaijani Muslims carried out by the ethnic Armenians in that enclave, and the Muslims were driven out of that territory. And because of that, a war erupted between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which was a 6-year-long war, and in which thousands of individuals on both sides were killed. After that war, there was a stalemate, and Armenia established its strong control, or Armenian militias or militants established their strong control over the Nagorno-Karabakh enclave.
Taimur, did you just say that the 6 weeks war that we are talking about between Azerbaijan and Armenia was originally initiated by Armenian forces entering into Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan then had to respond back to the infiltration made across the international border, and this is how the conflict started?
Well, if you have to keep in mind that both the warring parties, they propagate or give out their own respective narratives as far as the 6-week war of the 2020 between Azerbaijan and Armenia is concerned. If you ask the Armenian side, they claim that it was the Azerbaijani military which actually instigated the hostilities inside the Armenian territory, while on the other hand, the Azerbaijani side, it claims that it was the Armenian forces and Armenian supported militias in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict which actually attacked the Azerbaijani forces inside the Azerbaijani territory, and the Azeris were defending their own forces and their territory, and that is where the hostilities actually ensued. So it actually depends on whom you are asking the question of who instigated the hostilities in the first place.
So if I understood you correctly, it's a religious conflict and has got nothing to do with the ethnicity as propagated most of the time.
Well, yes, of course, because as soon as the hostilities by the Armenian ethnic Armenians in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict started back in the 90s, it was primarily because of the religious sentiment of the ethnic Armenians against the ethnic Muslim majority of the Nagorno-Karabakh region. And that is where the conflict actually erupted, which, like you said, from the religious sentiments.
Taimur, Iran has a past with Azerbaijan. Both the countries have remained part of one empire at some time. But still we see Iran doesn't enjoy good relations with Azerbaijan. On the contrary, Turkey, a country that is geographically a bit far, or historically hasn't been remained as close as Iran, is a very close ally of Azerbaijan. So tell us about the foreign policy of Azerbaijan and how does it set forth its alignments in the international order?
Well, you have to realize one thing, that Azerbaijani territory, historically, it was part of the greater Iranian political entity. So Iran thinks that Azerbaijan is part of the greater Iranian political entity or Iranian territory. So you have to understand that that is why there is some sort of friction which exists between the the Azerbaijanis and the Iranians. But as far as your question with regards to Azerbaijanis foreign policy is concerned, after President Aliyev took over the presidency of Azerbaijan, its foreign policy had made significant strides, and it was able to establish cordial relations with several regional and extra-regional countries, like you named Turkey, Pakistan, and especially the European Union as of the recent past. Because Azerbaijan is an energy-rich country, and it has a lot of energy sources in the Caspian Sea, which actually borders the eastern borders of Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan, with careful and calculated foreign policy maneuvers, has been able to establish good cordial relations with several countries, as you mentioned, like Turkey, Pakistan, the European Union, so on and so forth.
Taimur, isn't it a fact that the trade route that Azerbaijan occupies or sits right at the heart of plays a significant role in defining the significance of the country at large?
Well, of course, Russia has a lot of important economic and strategic interests in Azerbaijan, and so does Turkey as well as the European Union, especially after the Russia-Ukraine war that ensued after February 24, 2022. The European Union, there is a huge vacuum of energy demand inside the European Union. And after the levying of economic sanctions against the Russian energy sources, the European market is left with a large demand for energy sources, and Azerbaijan is a very affordable and you can say a very lucrative source of energy for the European market. And Turkey is another transit through which the Azerbaijani energy will be carried out through the southern Turkey and into the main European mainland. So recently, the head of European Council, von der Leyen, she was in she was in Azerbaijan a couple of months ago, and they signed an MOU on the transit of energy from the Azeri sources in the Caspian Sea all the way to southern Turkey and into the main European mainland. So yes, more strategic and economic, you can say, stakes have been developed inside Azerbaijan for the rest of the regions and countries as well, particularly Turkey and the European Union. Apart from that, Russian energy also is carried to the Iranian mainland through the territory of Azerbaijan. So yes, Russia also has a lot of strategic and economic interest inside Azerbaijan as well.
And if I understood you correctly, Taimur, the significance of Azerbaijan therefore is going to increase for Europe amid the worst energy crisis that Europe is facing at the moment.
Well, I definitely agree with that, because the more the conflict in Ukraine lingers on, the more requirement of energy will, or the demand of energy will increase, not only in the European continent, but in other peripheral regions as well. And the more significance of the Azerbaijani energy will also increase likewise. So yes, with the contemporary global political situation, I think the strategic importance of Azerbaijan will only increase with time.
Taimur, as we are repeatedly talking about Russia, let's discuss Russia openly now. And we know that Azerbaijan has been an ex-colony of USSR. Despite the fact, evidently the influence of Russia is declining, as we discussed earlier. Would you agree with me on that?
Well, yes, but for, if you have to analyze the receding influence of Russia in the region, you'll have to take into account the general international environment, or the international security environment for that matter, into account as well. Because as you are aware that Russia is, extremely or completely engaged in its war with Ukraine. And as you must be aware that Armenia is part of the CSTO bloc, or you can say call it the Russian NATO. and Azerbaijan is also an ex-Soviet state, so Russia by default becomes the major security guarantor for both these countries, and that is why Russia invited both these countries to resolve their issues amicably.
Which thereby means that the current ceasefire is being brokered by United States, and the agreement made or brokered by Russia in the past has not been honored by both the sides.
Of course, because you have to realize that as the strategic and economic significance of Azerbaijan is increasing with time, and the economic stakes of the European Union increasing in amicable relations with Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan has also realized that it no longer or majorly requires Russian support at the moment, and it can exist or carry on with its own foreign policy objectives independent of the Russian influence. So Azerbaijan is also not that much inclined to listen to the terms enforced by the Russian Federation. Armenia, on the other hand, is also extremely displeased with the response of its request towards Russia when it invoked Article 4 of the CSTO for collective security when Azerbaijan was gaining, control of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in the past few months. So Armenia is also extremely apprehensive of, dealing with Russia or depending on Russia to establish peace as far as the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is concerned. And in this regard, United States of America has capitalized on this opportunity, and it invited the foreign ministers of both Armenia and Azerbaijan to the US and carry out or conduct face-to-face peace talks and negotiations and come up with a plan for durable peace as far as the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is concerned. And I think both sides, the Armenians and the Azerbaijanis, are more forthcoming with the proposals that are being put forward by the United States of America as compared to Russia.
Taimur, as you pointed out, the difference between Armenia and Russia are growing. And Armenia is gradually trying to come out of the influence of Russia. And if Russia remains engaged on the front of Ukraine, this might mean many other countries in the region might just follow the suit.
Well, yes, and you can already see several countries who are actually trying to create the wiggle room for themselves from under the Russian influence. For instance, Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is slowly and gradually trying to, be more independent as far as its own pursuit of foreign policy objectives are concerned. It is trying to create more amicable and durable relations with the Western world. And then you can also see the similar situation ensuing in other Central Asian countries as well, such as Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. They are also trying to establish more durable and cordial relations with the United States of America and other European Union countries. So yes, as you are aware that the more Russia gets engaged or remains engaged in the Ukraine war, the more countries in its periphery are going to try and move out of the Russian sphere of influence, because international relations are like shark-infested waters. And if the countries that are under anyone's influence, they see hegemon or global major power bleeding, sharks are going to go for the kill. Or at least they are going to capitalize on that opportunity and create more space for themselves. And this is exactly what is happening in Russia's periphery, that as the Russian power and influence is waning because of several reasons, the different countries that were under the Russian influence are also slowly and gradually moving away from its sphere of influence.
Taimur, I have to hold you here. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join you back with the third and last segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back. Ladies and gentlemen, we have discussed the issue of Azerbaijan and Armenia. Another important development that the program FAULTLINES, by the virtue of its design, cannot afford to miss is the retreat of Russia from the region of Kherson. Now, there were 4 regions of Ukraine occupied by Russia, and Kherson was one of these regions that has been completely vacated by the Russian forces. Taimur is an expert of the matter, and since he's on the program, I would want Taimur to comment on it. Taimur, is it not very difficult or very hard for Russia to sell this humiliating retreat that it has just demonstrated in the region of Kherson?
That is true, but how I see this retreat from the Kherson region in particular as a strategic retreat by the Russian Federation, because there are several factors to it. The first factor is that, as infamously said, the winter is coming. And Russians as well as the Europeans, especially the Ukrainians, they are aware that European winters are extremely harsh. And both the sides realize that not much fighting is going to take place, especially when the winter is upon them. And it will be devastating for any side that will try to outmaneuver the other side during this kind of climate. There is enough, you can say, archival memory or the experiences in the Europeans' minds as well as in the minds of the Russians that any warfare conducted in the European winters is bound to fail or bound to crash and burn. So both sides have strategically decided that they are not going to launch any sort of a significant assault while winter is upon Europe. So Russia, for that matter, strategically retreated from the Kherson region so that it can protect its remaining forces in the Kherson region, which were massively pounded by the advancing Ukrainian forces. But one thing needs to be kept in mind, that while the Russians strategically retreated from the Kherson region, they had been mining all that space that they had vacated. So it is definitely going to take a lot of time for the Ukrainian forces to make any significant advance while the entire region is mined by the Russian forces. So Ukrainians are also not going to launch any sort of significant assault against the retreating Russian forces.
And how about the other three regions? Because the logic that you have presented, the logic of harsh winters, might just stand equally correct if we talk of the other three regions of Ukraine.
No, I don't think so, because in Kharkiv region, the Russians are already positioned in a very well dug out defensive positions. And in the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, Russian forces are already supplemented and supported by the local militias of Luhansk and Donetsk as well. So Russians do not need to retreat from those regions, and they are already in very strong defensive positions. But in Kherson region, they were in a very peculiar position. That is why they had to make such a strategic retreat from there.
But this actually brings us back to the question that we have already discussed many times in the past as well. Couldn't Putin actually foresee what has happened to them in Kherson?
Well, I think President Putin very strongly underestimated the Ukrainian resolve to defend their territories. He was not expecting them to put up such a strong fight, and he was also not expecting that the Western support or the Western assistance to the Ukrainian forces, the military as well as the financial assistance, to carry on for such a long time. And he was banking on their aid fatigue, which also didn't materialize so soon. So there were certain miscalculations made by the Russian leadership. That is why they had to recalibrate their strategy altogether as far as the eastern part of Ukraine was concerned.
Taimur, would Russia be willing to hold on for these winters that are going to be very important in this war? And if so, do you believe after this winters things are going to turn on their head for Russia?
Well, of course, Russia is still counting on this winter period in order to drain out the resolve of the Ukrainian forces, and also the fatigue, as I mentioned earlier, the aid fatigue to settle in the Western as well as particularly the US regarding Ukraine. It is banking that the more severe the energy and the gas crisis gets in Europe, Russia would more amicably take advantage of that situation, and it would also put more pressure on the European countries in order to convince the Ukrainian authorities to enter into peace negotiations with the Russian Federation. So yes, these few months of winters are very crucial in this matter.
And more importantly, Taimur, if things do not work Russia's way, do you believe Russia has a choice of walking out of this conflict entirely, thereby meaning vacating all the territory that it has held in Ukraine?
Well, if Russians withdrew from the four annexed regions of Ukraine, I think that will be devastating for the remaining morale of the Russian forces and for the entire political career of President Vladimir Putin and the image that he has created inside his own population. And I think if the Russian forces had to completely withdraw from Ukraine, I think that will be the end of President Putin's reign in Russia, and it will be devastating for the entire Russian Federation itself.
And lastly, Taimur, do you believe NATO will stop here after finishing this project and sitting on the borders of a Russia that is bleeding wounds? Do you believe NATO will just stop here? It's going to be a nightmare for Russia, though.
Well, I think the NATO would be very careful, especially if they see that Russia has nothing remaining to lose. And they would realize that if the more strong advance they make eastwards, the more belligerent and more dangerous Russian leadership and its forces will get. And if they get dangerous, this means that they'll resort to the very last dangerous option of nuclear warfare. And I don't think so that NATO will ever opt for an option that will actually provide the Russian leadership with the grounds to launch a nuclear war.
Thank you very much, Taimur, for being guest in our program today.
Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, the conflicts are too many, but the conflict of Russia and Ukraine has a very important role in setting up the global fault lines. And these winters are very important, not only for Russia, not only for Europe, but for the entire global economy. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.